I arrived at my parents' house after a brutal 10-hour workday to find my 4-year-old son Jackson sitting alone on the front porch, tears streaming down his face. When I rushed to him, my mother appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "We had plans tonight," she said with an annoyed laugh. "We are not your nannies, Braden." Her words hit like a physical blow. For 3 years, I had been secretly paying their mortgage, after Dad's business failed. Standing there, watching my son wipe his tears on his sleeve, something inside me snapped. "Perfect," I replied calmly. "Then pay your own mortgage." That's when the panic began. The drive home was silent, except for Jackson's occasional sniffles from the back seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. How had we gotten here? 3 years ago, I would have sworn my parents, and I had the closest relationship possible. I was 32, a senior software developer at Horizon Technologies, and a widower. My wife Amanda had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer shortly after Jackson's second birthday. The doctors had given her 6 months. She lasted 4. During those brutal months, my parents had been my rock. Mom would stay with Amanda while I took Jackson to the park, giving her brief moments to rest. Dad would handle the paperwork from hospital billing departments when the endless phone calls became too much for me. After Amanda died, they helped me pick up the pieces. Mom would come over with homemade lasagna and fresh groceries. Dad taught Jackson how to ride his tricycle around the driveway. They were everything I needed them to be during the darkest period of my life. When Jackson turned 3, I finally felt ready to return to work full-time. My parents had offered to watch him during work days. "We're retired. What else do we have to do?" Dad had said with his characteristic hearty laugh. "Plus, we get to spoil our only grandkid." It had seemed like the perfect arrangement. What I never told them was that their retirement wasn't as secure as they pretended. 6 months after Amanda's funeral, Dad had shown up at my house late one night, clearly distressed. His construction business had been struggling since the recession hit, but he'd kept the extent of their financial troubles from everyone. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. "I've never failed at anything in my life, son," he'd said, voice breaking. "I don't know how to tell your mother we might lose the house she's lived in for 30 years. That night I made a decision. I had Amanda's life insurance money and a good salary. I could afford to help. Without telling either of them, I contacted their bank and arranged to take over their mortgage payments. It was $2,200 a month I could manage, and it gave me peace of mind, knowing they were secure. I never intended for them to find out. Dad had too much pride, and I didn't want to hurt him further. In exchange, they watched Jackson during work hours, which saved me the cost of daycare. It seemed like a fair arrangement, even if they didn't know all the details. Things had been working well until about 6 months ago. I started noticing subtle changes in Mom's behavior. She would make comments about how active Jackson was, how exhausting it was to keep up with a 4-year-old. Sometimes when I arrived to pick him up, she would immediately grab her purse and rush out to meet friends, as if desperate for escape. "I've never failed at anything in my life, son," he'd said, voice breaking. "I don't know how to tell your mother we might lose the house she's lived in for 30 years. The drive home was silent, except for Jackson's occasional sniffles from the back seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. How had we gotten here? 3 years ago, I would have sworn my parents, and I had the closest relationship possible. Last month, my sister Ashley called me with strange news. "Did you know Mom's been complaining about babysitting to everyone in the family?" Aunt Paula told me, "Mom said she feels taken advantage of." "Maybe I should look into daycare options," I told Ashley. "I don't want to burden them." "No, don't do that," Ashley had insisted. "Mom would be devastated. You know how much she loves Jackson. She's probably just having a bad week." I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. Now, standing in my kitchen watching Jackson push his macaroni and cheese around his plate, I realized how wrong things had gone. "Daddy, why was Grandma mad at me?" Jackson asked, his small voice pulling me from my thoughts. "She wasn't mad at you, buddy. Grandma and Grandpa just had other plans tonight." I tried to keep my voice light, though rage still simmered beneath the surface. But I was good. I colored in my book like she told me to. I sat down next to him and pulled him into a hug. You're always good, Jackson. This is grown-up stuff, not about you. As I tucked him into bed that night, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from my parents. I ignored them all. I needed time to think, to decide what happened next. The last text from Mom read, "We need to talk. Your father is very upset." My father was upset? I nearly laughed at the irony. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Ashley. When I answered, her voice was tight with anger. "What did you do?" Mom called me crying, saying you threatened them. And that's when I realized the situation was even worse than I thought. My mother hadn't just rejected her grandson and taken my support for granted. She was already spinning the story to make herself the victim. I agreed to meet my parents the next day. I arranged for Jackson to spend the afternoon with Will, a single dad from his preschool class who had become a friend over the past year. I didn't want my son anywhere near the conversation I needed to have. My parents' house was the same one I'd grown up in, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet suburb. The mortgage I'd been paying protected not just their home, but all my childhood memories. Mom answered the door before I could knock, her eyes red-rimmed. "Braden, thank goodness. We need to clear this up." She reached for a hug, but I stepped past her into the house. Dad sat in his recliner, looking smaller somehow. He nodded at me but didn't speak. "Where's Jackson?" Mom asked, looking behind me as if he might be hiding. "With a friend. This conversation isn't for him." Mom's face tightened. "You're keeping my grandson from me now?" I took a deep breath. Let's be clear about what happened yesterday. I arrived to find my 4-year-old son sitting alone on the porch crying because his grandmother had more important plans than keeping him safe. He was perfectly safe. "I was watching from the window," she protested. "He's 4 years old, Mom. He shouldn't be sitting outside alone, period." Dad finally spoke up. "Susan, the boy's right. That wasn't our agreement." Mom whirled on him. "Our agreement? Our agreement was to help occasionally, not become full-time unpaid nannies. I'm 64 years old, Frank. I deserve some freedom at this age." "Freedom?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You think I have freedom? I'm a 32-year-old widower, raising a child alone while working 50-hour weeks. And for the past 3 years, I've been carrying this family financially without a single word of complaint." My mother's expression shifted from indignation to confusion. "What are you talking about? We've never asked you for money." That was the moment. The point of no return. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and showed them the mortgage payment that had cleared just 3 days earlier. $2,200. Every month for 3 years. "That's your mortgage, Mom. The one I've been paying since Dad's business went under." The color drained from both their faces. Dad stood up so quickly his recliner slammed back against the wall. "What? How? I've been sending payments every month," he stammered. "No, Dad. You've been sending empty envelopes. The bank calls me when there are problems. I've been handling it all." Mom sank onto the couch. "That's not possible. We would have known." "Would you? When was the last time either of you checked your bank balance or opened a bank statement? I've been having them sent to my address for years." Dad's shoulders slumped as realization washed over him. "Son, I never meant for this to happen. I was going to catch up when business improved." "I know, Dad. That's why I did it. But here's what I don't understand." I turned to my mother, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "How could you say you're being taken advantage of when I'm the one keeping a roof over your head?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "How was I supposed to know?" "That's not the point. Even if you didn't know about the mortgage, you agreed to watch Jackson. That was our arrangement. And yesterday, you broke that trust." "We had tickets to the theater," she said weakly. "We've been planning it for weeks. Then you should have told me weeks ago, so I could find alternative childcare. Not left my son sitting on the porch." Dad approached me, his hands outstretched. "Braden, please. We made a terrible mistake. We're sorry." I stepped back. "Sorry isn't enough this time. I need you both to understand something. I'm giving you 30 days to figure out your finances. After that, I'm stopping the mortgage payments." "You can't do that," Mom cried. "We'll lose the house." Then get jobs. Downsize. Take out a loan. Do what every other adult in this country does when they have bills to pay. And what about Jackson? Dad asked quietly. I'll find other arrangements. Clearly, this situation isn't working for any of us. Mom stood now, anger replacing her shock. So that's it? One mistake and you're cutting us off? After everything we did for you when Amanda died? Her words hit their mark. The guilt and grief I still carried daily surged to the surface, but I pushed it back down. I've been grateful for your help, but that doesn't give you the right to neglect my son or make him feel unwanted. He's already lost his mother. I won't let him think his grandparents don't want him either. Of course we want him, Mom exclaimed. We love Jackson. Then you should have thought about that yesterday. I headed for the door. I'll be in touch about the mortgage situation. Their pleas followed me out to the car, but I didn't look back. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I had never spoken to my parents that way in my entire life. The guilt was already creeping in, mixing with the anger and hurt. My phone rang before I reached the end of their street. Ashley again. Mom just called me hysterical, she said without preamble. She said you're throwing them out of their house? What the hell, Braden? That's not what happened, Ashley. Then explain. Because according to Mom and Dad, you showed up making wild accusations and threatening them. I pulled over and told her everything. The mortgage payments, Mom's resentment, finding Jackson alone on the porch. Wait, they left him outside alone? Ashley asked, her tone shifting. Yes, because they had theater tickets. She was quiet for a moment. Jesus. But still, Braden, cutting off the mortgage? That seems extreme. I've been carrying them for 3 years without a word of thanks, because I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. But I won't let Jackson suffer because Mom wants her freedom. They're adults. They can figure it out. I get that you're angry, but this affects the whole family. They're saying you've changed since Amanda died, that you're not thinking clearly. My blood ran cold. They're what? They called everyone. Braden, Aunt Paula, Uncle Steve, even Grandma. They're saying you had some kind of breakdown and they're worried about you. As I hung up with Ashley, I realized the situation had become much worse than I thought. Not only had my mother rejected her childcare responsibilities and taken my financial support for granted, but she was now actively turning the family against me to protect herself. The vibration of my phone continued as message after message arrived from extended family members, all concerned about my mental state and urging me to make things right with my parents. By the time I picked up Jackson from Will's house, I felt completely alone. But looking at my son's smile as he showed me the Lego creation he'd built, I knew I had to stay strong. For both of us. The next few weeks were among the most challenging of my life, second only to watching Amanda die. Finding reliable childcare on short notice proved nearly impossible. Most daycare centers had waiting lists, and the few that had openings were far from either my home or workplace. I ended up piecing together a patchwork solution. Will agreed to drop off and pick up Jackson along with his daughter Emma 3 days a week. I worked from home the other 2 days, scheduling my most important meetings during Jackson's preschool hours. My boss Ted surprised me with his understanding. I'd always kept my personal struggles private at work, focusing instead on exceeding expectations despite my complicated home life. When I finally explained my situation, he offered flexibility I hadn't dared ask for. Family comes first, Braden, he said, during our one-on-one meeting. We can make this work until you find a permanent solution. Meanwhile, the family drama intensified. Ashley remained caught in the middle, alternating between defending me to our parents and urging me to reconcile with them. The extended family largely took my parents' side, sending me texts and emails about honoring thy father and mother and forgiveness being divine. None of them knew about the mortgage payments, and I refused to use that information as a weapon. If my parents wanted to paint me as the villain, so be it. I knew the truth. Jackson started having problems at school. His teacher called to report he'd had 3 crying episodes in 1 week and had become withdrawn during playtime. When I asked him about it that night, he looked at his shoes and asked, "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me forever?" "No, buddy. They love you very much," I said, hating that I had to reassure him of something that should have been unquestionable. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements that have nothing to do with kids. Then why can't I see them? I had no good answer. The following Saturday, I was sorting through bills at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my father standing alone on the porch, looking haggard. "Can I come in?" he asked. I had no good answer. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Jackson's napping. Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he began. "She'd be furious." "Why are you here, Dad?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "To apologize. First of all, what happened with Jackson was inexcusable, and to thank you for what you've done for us. I had no idea you were making our mortgage payments all this time. I didn't want you to know. I knew it would hurt your pride." "My pride," he laughed bitterly. "My pride is what got us into this mess. I should have been honest about the business failing, instead of pretending everything was fine. I should have downsized years ago, instead of taking out loans to keep up appearances." I was surprised by his candor. My father had always been the stereotypical stoic provider, never discussing finances or feelings. "There's something else you should know," he continued. "Your mother has a problem. A gambling problem." The revelation stunned me. Gambling? Since when? It started small, just some online poker after I went to bed. But these past 2 years, it's gotten worse. Casino trips with her friends that she calls girls' nights out. Cash withdrawals that disappear. I've tried talking to her about it, but she denies there's a problem. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Mom's fancy new clothes, despite their supposed financial troubles. The weekends she was visiting friends, but returned exhausted. Her resentment toward childcare duties that kept her home. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Same reason you didn't tell us about the mortgage. Pride. Shame." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I failed as a provider, and now I'm failing as a husband. I don't know how to fix any of this, Braden." I felt a surge of empathy for my father. He was a proud man facing the collapse of everything he valued. "Have you looked into treatment programs for her?" He nodded. "She refuses. Says she can stop anytime she wants." Meanwhile, his voice trailed off. "Meanwhile what, Dad?" He looked physically pained as he forced out the words. "We took out a second mortgage on the house 8 months ago. I didn't know until the paperwork came. She forged my signature. We owe almost as much now as we did when we first bought the place 30 years ago." I sat back, stunned. The situation was far worse than I had imagined. Even if I continued paying the first mortgage, they were still drowning in debt. "Does Ashley know any of this?" "No one knows except you now." He reached across the table and gripped my hand. "I'm not asking you to keep paying our mortgage. You're right that we need to face reality. I just wanted you to understand why your mother's been so erratic, and to ask if Jackson could still see us sometimes. He's the light of our lives, son." The sincerity in his voice moved me. Despite everything, I never doubted that my parents loved Jackson. "We can figure something out," I said carefully. "But things need to change, Dad. Real changes." He nodded, standing to leave. "I'm working on it. And Braden, thank you for everything you've done. I'm sorry we let you down." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, processing everything I'd learned. My anger toward my mother was now complicated by concern. Addiction was a disease, not a moral failing. But her behavior toward Jackson was still inexcusable, and her attempts to turn the family against me showed a troubling pattern of manipulation. I was still deep in thought when my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from our family lawyer, Harold Winters. The subject line read, "Regarding the trust fund for Jackson Carter." Confused, I opened it immediately. Harold was writing to confirm that the paperwork for Jackson's trust fund had been completed, and the account was now active. The problem? I had never set up a trust fund for Jackson. The email mentioned recent discussions and as per your mother's instructions. A chill ran down my spine as I dialed Harold's number. After a brief conversation, the truth emerged. My mother had contacted him claiming to represent me, inquiring about accessing Amanda's life insurance money that I had set aside for Jackson's future. The depth of betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just about childcare or hurt feelings anymore. My mother had tried to access my dead wife's insurance money set aside for my son's future. Just as I hung up with Harold, my phone lit up with a text from Ashley. Family meeting at Mom and Dad's tomorrow. Everyone will be there. Please come so we can fix this. But after what I'd just discovered, I wasn't sure anything could be fixed. In the midst of family chaos, unexpected support emerged from an unlikely source. Will, the single dad from Jackson's preschool, had become more than just a carpool partner. After hearing snippets of my situation during drop-offs and pickups, he invited Jackson and me over for a Sunday barbecue. Just burgers and dogs, he said casually. Emma's been asking to have Jackson over anyway. Plus, my sister Grace is visiting. She's great with the kids. That Sunday provided the first moments of normalcy I'd felt in weeks. Will's backyard was modest, but filled with the kind of thoughtful touches that made it a paradise for kids. A sandbox, a small climbing structure, and a water table that kept Jackson and Emma occupied for hours. Grace turned out to be a kindergarten teacher with an easy manner and infectious laugh. She helped the kids build an elaborate sand castle while Will and I manned the grill. Grace has been a lifesaver since Jenny left, Will explained, referring to his ex-wife who had moved across the country for a job. She comes by whenever she can to help with Emma. You're lucky to have her, I said, feeling a pang of envy for his support system. Hey, we single dads have to stick together, Will replied, flipping a burger. Which reminds me, Grace is between jobs right now. She's interviewing for positions for next fall, but has the summer free. She mentioned she might be up for some childcare if you're still looking. By the end of the afternoon, Grace and I had exchanged numbers, and she had agreed to watch Jackson 3 days a week until school started in the fall. Her warmth and clear rapport with Jackson eased a weight I'd been carrying. You're lucky to have her, I said, feeling a pang of envy for his support system. Grace turned out to be a kindergarten teacher with an easy manner and infectious laugh. She helped the kids build an elaborate sand castle while Will and I manned the grill. By the end of the afternoon, Grace and I had exchanged numbers, and she had agreed to watch Jackson 3 days a week until school started in the fall. Her warmth and clear rapport with Jackson eased a weight I'd been carrying. Just like his mom, I replied, the familiar ache of missing Amanda surfacing briefly. The following week brought both progress and new challenges. Grace proved to be everything Jackson needed, bringing structure and joy to his days. His school reported improvements in his mood and participation. It would mean some travel for the first few months, Ted explained. Probably 2 trips to San Francisco, 1 week each. But after that, it would be remote management with a significant pay increase. The opportunity was exactly what my career needed, but the timing couldn't have been worse. The thought of leaving Jackson for a week seemed impossible. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. But don't take too long. They're making decisions by the end of the month. Meanwhile, the situation with my parents remained unresolved. I had ignored the family meeting text from Ashley, unable to face more manipulation and accusations. Instead, I'd focused on creating stability for Jackson. But avoiding the problem didn't make it disappear. My father called repeatedly, each message more desperate than the last. Your mother's agreed to talk to someone, his latest voicemail said. Please, son, give us another chance. After much deliberation and long talks with Grace, who had become a trusted confidant, I decided to allow my parents to see Jackson for 1 weekend. Grace offered to facilitate the visit, dropping Jackson off and picking him up to minimize direct contact between my parents and me. Are you sure about this? Will asked when I told him my decision. After everything that's happened? They're still his grandparents, I replied, and my dad seems genuinely remorseful. Plus, if I take this promotion, I need to know if they can be trusted for occasional visits while I'm away. The weekend was scheduled for late June. I spent hours preparing Jackson, explaining that he would have a sleepover at Grandma and Grandpa's house while Daddy had to work. His initial excitement was tempered with concern. Will you call me at bedtime? He asked, his small face serious. Every night, I promised. And Grace will pick you up on Sunday afternoon. Grace dropped him off Friday evening with clear instructions. Medications, bedtime routine, emergency contacts. My parents were on their best behavior, according to her brief text after the drop-off. The house felt eerily quiet, without Jackson's chatter and constant movement. I spent Saturday catching up on work and preparing for my interview for the promotion. By Sunday morning, I was counting the hours until Grace would bring him home. Around noon, my phone rang. Grace's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, just checking in. About to head over to pick up Jackson," she said. "Great. How was the drop-off on Friday?" "Fine. Your mom seemed a bit tense, but your dad was super engaged with Jackson. Had a whole treasure hunt planned." I felt a wave of relief. That sounds like the dad I grew up with. "I'll text when we're on our way back." The house felt eerily quiet, without Jackson's chatter and constant movement. I spent Saturday catching up on work and preparing for my interview for the promotion. By Sunday morning, I was counting the hours until Grace would bring him home. My heart nearly stopped. I called the number immediately. "What happened? Where's Jackson?" I demanded when she answered. "He fell from the treehouse in your parents' backyard," Zoe explained. "I heard him crying and went to check. He's got a pretty bad cut on his head. I'm with him now. But your parents aren't here." "What do you mean they're not there? Where are they?" I spent the next hour tidying the house and preparing Jackson's favorite dinner as a welcome home surprise. When my phone pinged an hour later, I expected Grace's update. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Carter, this is Zoe Williams, your parents' neighbor. There's been an accident with Jackson. Your parents aren't answering their phone. Please call me, as soon as possible." The world tilted sideways. How bad is he hurt? Do I need to call an ambulance? The bleeding has stopped, but he might need stitches. He's really upset and keeps asking for you. I'll be right there. Don't move him if he's comfortable. I hung up and immediately called Grace, explaining the situation as I grabbed my keys and ran to the car. I made the 30-minute drive to my parents' house in 20, my mind racing with scenarios, each worse than the last. Grace said she would meet me there. When I pulled up, a teenage girl was sitting on the front porch steps with Jackson, holding an ice pack to his forehead. His face was tear-stained, but he lit up when he saw me. "Daddy!" he cried, running toward me. "I don't know. Your mom asked me to watch him for just an hour around 10 this morning. Said they had an emergency. I'm 16, I babysit sometimes, so I said okay. But that was 3 hours ago, and they're not answering my texts." "What happened, buddy?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the rage building inside me. "I was playing Explorer in the treehouse, but the ladder broke." "I'm sorry, Daddy." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I assured him, thanking Zoe for her help. "Do you know where my parents went?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Your mom just said they had to run out for a bit." She seemed in a hurry. Grace arrived as I was loading Jackson into my car to take him to the emergency room. "I'll get his things," she offered, hurrying into the house. The ER doctor confirmed Jackson needed 7 stitches. He was brave through the procedure, only crying when they had to clean the wound. By the time we got home that evening, he was exhausted, but already showing off his battle scar with pride. Grace stayed to help get him settled. "I can't believe they left him with a teenager they barely know," she said, as we sat at my kitchen table after Jackson fell asleep and didn't answer their phones for hours. I showed her the texts I'd received from my parents while we were at the hospital. A series of frantic messages asking where Jackson was, claiming they'd only been gone a short while and that Zoe had been completely irresponsible for taking him without permission. I scooped him up, carefully examining the cut above his eye. It was about an inch long, and had stopped bleeding but looked deep. "Classic deflection," I replied, the emotional exhaustion of the day finally hitting me. I should have known better than to trust them. Grace reached across the table and took my hand. "You gave them a chance because you're a good person who wants his son to have grandparents in his life. That's not a mistake, Braden." As Grace left that night, she hugged me tightly. "You're not alone in this," she whispered. "Will and I, we're here for you guys." Her words were a lifeline. For the first time since finding Jackson on that porch, I allowed myself to break down, sobbing in the shower where Jackson couldn't hear me. The betrayal, the fear, the exhaustion all poured out. The next morning, I called Ted and accepted the promotion. If I was going to rebuild our lives and create security for Jackson, I needed to move forward professionally. Grace agreed to stay at our house during my upcoming business trips, providing continuity for Jackson. My father's calls went straight to voicemail. I had nothing left to say to either of my parents. But as I was putting Jackson to bed that night, he asked in a small voice, "Can I still love Grandma and Grandpa even if they did something bad?" Looking at his innocent face, the stitches stark against his skin, I realized this wasn't just about my hurt feelings anymore. This was about protecting my son from people who had proven themselves dangerously irresponsible. "Of course you can love them," I told him. "But sometimes we need to love people from a distance if being close to them isn't safe." He seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Like how we love Mommy even though she's in heaven." The comparison broke my heart all over again. "Something like that, buddy." As I kissed him goodnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "We need to talk. It's serious. Mom and Dad are saying you're unstable and unfit to be a father. They're talking about trying to get custody of Jackson." The emergency room bill arrived on Tuesday, a stark reminder of what could have happened if Jackson's injuries had been worse. 7 stitches and a mild concussion. The doctor had emphasized how fortunate we were that he hadn't hit his head at a different angle. I stared at the paper, thinking about Ashley's text. My parents were claiming I was unfit after leaving my injured child with a teenage neighbor so they could... What? I later learned from that same neighbor that their emergency had been a last-minute invitation to a casino an hour away. The breaking point wasn't the betrayal or even the injury. It was the realization that my parents were dangerous to my son. Not through malice, but through a complete abdication of responsibility and their willingness to lie to protect themselves. I called a family law attorney that afternoon. Janet Brooks came highly recommended by a colleague who had gone through a contentious divorce. She agreed to see me immediately after I explained the situation. The emergency room bill arrived on Tuesday, a stark reminder of what could have happened if Jackson's injuries had been worse. 7 stitches and a mild concussion. The doctor had emphasized how fortunate we were that he hadn't hit his head at a different angle. I stared at the paper, thinking about Ashley's text. My parents were claiming I was unfit after leaving my injured child with a teenage neighbor so they could... What? I later learned from that same neighbor that their emergency had been a last-minute invitation to a casino an hour away. Janet listened carefully as I detailed the events of the past month, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. Some of the tension left my shoulders. "But they're saying I'm mentally unstable. Based on what evidence? Grief over your wife's death? Setting boundaries with your parents? These are normal, healthy behaviors." She leaned forward. "That said, we should be prepared. I'd like to document everything that's happened, including Jackson's injury while in their care, their financial dependence on you, and any evidence of your mother's gambling problem." She recommended I keep a detailed log of all interactions with my parents, save texts and emails, and formally document my childcare arrangements with Grace. "I don't think they have a case, but it's always better to be prepared," Janet assured me. "And to be completely honest, if anyone should be concerned about custody evaluations, it's your parents, not you." As I left her office, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The relationship with my parents might be broken beyond repair, but at least I knew Jackson was legally safe. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations for my new role. Ted fast-tracked my onboarding so I could get up to speed before my first trip to San Francisco. Jackson's stitches came out, leaving only a faint pink line that the doctor assured me would fade with time. Grace became a constant in our lives, bringing stability and warmth that we both desperately needed. One evening, as Grace and I were preparing dinner while Jackson built a Lego spaceship at the kitchen table, my phone rang. Ashley's name appeared on the screen. "I need to see you," she said without preamble when I answered. "Alone. It's important." We arranged to meet for lunch the next day, at a cafe halfway between our homes. Jackson would be at preschool, and Grace had offered to pick him up. Ashley was already waiting when I arrived, looking tense and tired. We ordered sandwiches that neither of us seemed interested in eating. "I've been doing some digging," she began after the server left, "about Mom and Dad's finances. I raised an eyebrow. What changed? Last time we spoke, you were firmly on team parents. She winced. I know, and I'm sorry. They had me convinced you were having some kind of breakdown. But after what happened with Jackson, she shook her head. I started asking questions, looking at their behavior more critically. And I found bank statements in Dad's desk drawer. Hundreds of ATM withdrawals over the past 2 years. Always the same amount, $500. Always at the same location, Silver Creek Casino. I wasn't surprised after what Dad had told me, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. Dad told me Mom has a gambling problem. It's worse than that, Braden. They've remortgaged the house twice. They've maxed out 6 credit cards. And when I confronted Dad, he broke down completely. Her voice cracked. He said they're over $300,000 in debt. The house is underwater. They've been selling off Mom's jewelry and antiques just to make minimum payments. Jesus, I muttered. I had no idea it was that bad. There's more, Ashley continued. Mom didn't just leave Jackson with that teenager to go to the casino. She left him because she was meeting with a lawyer of her own. A lawyer who specializes in grandparents' rights. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. She was planning this even while I was giving them another chance with Jackson? Ashley nodded miserably. Dad says she's convinced herself that you're keeping Jackson from them as punishment for the money problems. That none of this would be happening if you weren't still grieving Amanda and making irrational decisions. That's gaslighting, I said flatly. I'm keeping Jackson from them because they left him with a stranger and he got hurt. I know that now. Ashley reached across the table and gripped my hand. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you sooner. After lunch, I drove to the office in a daze, my mind racing with everything Ashley had revealed. The depth of my mother's denial and manipulation was staggering. More disturbing was her willingness to use Jackson as a pawn in her desperate attempts to maintain control. Back at my desk, I had trouble focusing on work until an email notification caught my attention. It was from the HR department, confirming my travel arrangements for the following week. The San Francisco trip was happening, ready or not. That evening, I sat down with Jackson to explain that Daddy would be going on a short trip for work. But Grace will be staying here with you the whole time, I assured him. And I'll call every night before bedtime. Will you bring me something from your trip? He asked, surprisingly calm about the news. Of course. What would you like? He thought for a moment. A snow globe with a bridge in it. Emma has one with New York in it. I'll find the perfect Golden Gate Bridge snow globe, I promised, relieved by his acceptance. As I tucked him in that night, a text arrived from an unknown number. It was a photo of my parents' house with a foreclosure notice sign in the yard. The sender was my father. We couldn't make the payment. The bank is taking the house. Your mother's moved in with her sister for now. I'm staying with a friend from the golf club. I didn't know where else to turn. I set the phone down without responding. A complex mix of emotions washing over me. The childhood home, where I'd grown up, where I'd brought Amanda to meet my parents, where Jackson had taken his first steps during a Christmas visit, was being repossessed. Despite everything, I felt a profound sadness. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Grace moved her essential belongings into my guest room to stay with Jackson during my trip. Will offered to have them over for dinner several nights. Janet, my attorney, provided a letter formally documenting my childcare arrangements to keep in case of any custody challenges. The morning I was set to leave for San Francisco, my doorbell rang at 6:30. I opened it to find my father standing there, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. Braden, he said, his voice rough. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need to talk to you. Please. I glanced at my watch. My flight wasn't until 11. Come in. Jackson's still asleep. We sat in the kitchen, the morning light casting long shadows across the table. Dad declined my offer of coffee, his hands shaking slightly. Your mother and I are separating, he said without preamble. I'm filing for divorce next week. The news shouldn't have shocked me, after everything that had happened, but it did. My parents had been married for 40 years. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He nodded, staring at his hands. She refuses to get help for the gambling. refuses to acknowledge what happened with Jackson was her fault. And now, he took a deep breath. Now she's convinced your sister and me that the only solution is to take Jackson away from you. She actually believes the courts will give her custody despite everything. She's delusional, I said flatly. She's sick, Dad corrected gently. The gambling, the denial, the manipulation. It's a disease that's destroying our family. Dad, I appreciate that you're trying to make things right, but I'm about to leave for a business trip. I've got a lot on my mind. I know, and I'm not here asking for money or forgiveness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. I'm here to give you this. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a stack of mail addressed to me, plus several official-looking documents. Your mother has been intercepting your mail for months, Dad explained. Anything sent to our address that was meant for you, she kept. Including this, he pointed to one of the documents. It was a letter from a life insurance company, dated 6 months earlier. Amanda had apparently maintained a separate policy through her employer that I hadn't known about. The benefit amount was $150,000, designated specifically for Jackson's education. She hid this from me, I said, anger rising again. My dead wife's insurance for our son's future. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a stack of mail addressed to me, plus several official-looking documents. Your mother has been intercepting your mail for months, Dad explained. Anything sent to our address that was meant for you, she kept. Including this, he pointed to one of the documents. Dad nodded miserably. She found it while cleaning out the mailbox after you'd been to visit. Said she was going to give it to you, but forgot. Then weeks passed, and she was afraid you'd be angry she'd kept it so long. Then she started thinking maybe it could solve our financial problems somehow. Because I'm done enabling her. Done pretending things will get better if I just ignore the problems. He looked up, his eyes wet with unshed tears. And because that money is for my grandson's future, it doesn't belong to us, no matter how desperate we are. In that moment, seeing my father's brokenness and his small attempt at redemption, I felt the first stirring of compassion I'd had in weeks. What will you do now? I asked. Where will you live? My friend Pete has a small rental property he's letting me stay in until I figure things out. I'm going to look for work next week. He managed a weak smile. Turns out my golf buddy owns a hardware store that needs help. Not exactly the career I imagined at 66, but it's something. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. I don't expect to be a part of Jackson's life again. Not after what happened. But I want you to know I'm getting help. Started going to a support group for families of addicts. Trying to understand how we got here. I walked him to the door, unsure what to say. As he stepped outside, I found myself asking, would you like to see Jackson before I go? He'll be up soon. The hope that flashed across his face was almost painful to witness. I would. More than anything. But only if you're sure. 10 minutes later, a sleepy Jackson padded into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He stopped short when he saw my father sitting at the table. Grandpa? He asked cautiously. Dad knelt down to Jackson's level. Hey, sport. I came to say goodbye to your daddy before his trip and thought I might see you too. Jackson approached slowly, his hand automatically going to the faint scar above his eye. Does your head still hurt from the treehouse? Dad asked gently. Jackson nodded. Sometimes it itches. I'm so sorry that happened. It was wrong of Grandma and me to leave you with someone else that day. To my surprise, Jackson stepped forward and patted my father's shoulder. It's okay. Daddy says sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too. The simple forgiveness of a child. As I watched my father interact carefully, respectfully with my son, I realized something important. The path forward might include forgiveness and healing, but it would never include returning to the dysfunctional patterns of the past. When Grace arrived to take over childcare duties, I introduced her to my father. This is Jackson's grandfather, Frank. He's on the approved list to visit, supervised only, while I'm away. Dad's eyes widened at this olive branch, however small. Thank you, he whispered as I left for the airport. I won't let you down again. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As the plane took off for San Francisco a few hours later, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The breaking point had been painful, but necessary. Sometimes, things need to break completely before they can begin to heal. San Francisco was a blur of meetings, presentations, and networking events. I forced myself to stay present, to engage fully with the opportunity this promotion represented for Jackson's future and mine. Each night, I called home at exactly 7:30 for Jackson's bedtime, listening as he chattered about his day with Grace. "Grace and I made cookies with Grandpa today," he mentioned on the third evening. I muted the phone briefly to take a deep breath before responding. "That sounds fun. Was Emma there too?" "Uh-huh. And her dad. We had a picnic in the backyard." He yawned. "Grandpa taught me how to play checkers. He says I'm a natural." After Jackson fell asleep, Grace filled me in. "Your father came by yesterday, very hesitant, asked if he could spend some time with Jackson under my supervision. I hope that was okay." "It's fine," I assured her. "How did it go?" "Really well, actually. He was patient and attentive with Jackson. Brought a checkerboard and spent an hour teaching him the rules. Will and Emma came over in the afternoon, and Frank was polite but quiet. I think he felt a bit awkward. And no sign of my mother?" "None. He came alone both times. While it was reassuring to hear about my father's efforts, my mother's absence was equally significant. Janet had warned me that her pursuit of grandparents' rights could become more aggressive, as she grew desperate. I had authorized Janet to send a cease and desist letter to my mother, copying the family attorney she'd consulted, outlining Jackson's injury, while in her care and her subsequent attempts to deflect responsibility. On my last night in San Francisco, I received an email from Janet. "Your mother's attorney has withdrawn. No filing for visitation rights has been submitted to the court." A small victory, but I knew my mother wouldn't give up easily. Her entire self-image was built around being the family matriarch, the one in control. Being denied access to her only grandchild, while watching her marriage and financial security crumble, would only fuel her desperation. I returned home late Friday night to find Grace and Jackson asleep on the couch, a children's movie playing on the TV. The house was spotlessly clean, and a welcome home sign hung in the entryway, decorated with Jackson's handprints. On the kitchen counter sat a homemade lasagna with reheating instructions in Grace's neat handwriting. As I gently carried Jackson to his bed, I was struck by how peaceful he looked. The constant anxiety that had shadowed his expression since the incident with my parents had faded. He was feeling secure again, thanks largely to the stability Grace had provided. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ashley arrived with coffee and donuts, a peace offering of sorts. "How was the trip?" she asked as Jackson devoured a chocolate-frosted donut at the kitchen table, happily showing off the Golden Gate Bridge snow globe I'd brought him. "Successful. I think we've got the West Coast expansion on track." I sipped the coffee. "Any word from Mom?" Ashley's expression tightened. "She's refusing to leave Aunt Paula's house. Says she has nowhere else to go because you're turning everyone against her. Classic manipulation. I know that now." Ashley picked at her donut. "I went to a support group meeting with Dad this week. For families of people with gambling addiction. It was illuminating. Hearing other people's stories. Seeing the patterns. Mom fits every criteria." We sat in silence for a moment, both watching Jackson play with his new treasure. "I'm sorry I doubted you," Ashley said quietly. "And I'm sorry about all those texts and calls from the extended family. I've been trying to set the record straight, but Mom's had years to perfect her victim narrative. I appreciate that, but honestly, I'm past caring what Aunt Paula or Uncle Steve think of me. My priority is Jackson. And your new life," Ashley said with a small smile, glancing toward the guest room where Grace was still sleeping. "She's good for you both, you know. For what it's worth, I like her." I felt my face warm. "We're just friends. She's been an incredible help with Jackson, that's all." Ashley raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Later that day, after Ashley left, Grace suggested we all go to the park. "Jackson's been looking forward to showing you his new frisbee skills," she explained. At the park, I watched as Grace patiently taught Jackson how to release the frisbee with a flick of his wrist. His peals of laughter each time it sailed through the air were like medicine for my soul. "You're really good with him," I told Grace as we sat on a bench while Jackson played on the slide. "He makes it easy," she replied. "He's resilient, just like his dad." Our eyes met, and for a moment, I glimpsed a future I hadn't dared imagine since Amanda died. A family, rebuilt from the broken pieces of our separate lives. The moment was interrupted by my phone. Janet's name flashed on the screen. "I've just received some concerning information," she said without preamble. "Your mother has been contacting Jackson's preschool, attempting to add herself to the approved pickup list. The school refused because she's not on your authorization form, but the director thought you should know." My stomach dropped. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll contact the school immediately." After hanging up, I explained the situation to Grace. Her expression hardened. "This has gone too far," she said. "She's not just hurting you anymore. She's actively trying to go around you to get to Jackson." "I need to make some calls," I said, scanning the playground for Jackson. He was safely playing in the sandbox with another child, but suddenly the open public space felt vulnerable. Over the next few days, I implemented a comprehensive security plan. I updated all authorization forms at Jackson's preschool, explicitly listing who could and could not pick him up. I installed a video doorbell and security cameras around our home. I provided Grace, Will, and Jackson's teachers with photos of my mother and instructions to call the police if she appeared. Janet helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, outlining the legal consequences if my mother continued attempting to access Jackson without permission. The letter was delivered to my aunt's house by certified mail. The response came not from my mother but from my father, who called the next evening. "She's spiraling, Braden," he said, his voice weary. "The letter from your lawyer sent her into a rage. She's convinced everyone is conspiring against her. She's talking about moving to Arizona to live with her cousin." "Maybe that would be for the best," I replied. "Some distance might give her perspective." Over the next few days, I implemented a comprehensive security plan. I updated all authorization forms at Jackson's preschool, explicitly listing who could and could not pick him up. I installed a video doorbell and security cameras around our home. I provided Grace, Will, and Jackson's teachers with photos of my mother and instructions to call the police if she appeared. "Thanks for the heads up. I've taken precautions." "Maybe that would be for the best," I replied. "Some distance might give her perspective." "Maybe." He sounded doubtful. "I wanted to warn you, though. She's been talking about coming to your house to explain her side directly. I tried to tell her that's a bad idea, especially after the legal notice, but she's not listening to reason." "He's a smart kid. Gets that from his mother." Dad's voice softened. "I know I have no right to ask, but if it's all right with you, I'd like to keep visiting him sometimes. Under supervision, of course." Getting to know him again has been the only bright spot in this mess. He's good. He enjoyed the checkers lessons. I thought about how Jackson had lit up when showing his grandfather his new toys, how carefully my father had listened to his rambling stories. "I won't," he interrupted firmly. "I've chosen my side in this, son. It took me too long, but I know where I stand now." 2 days later, the confrontation my father had warned about came to pass. I was working from home while Grace took Jackson to his swimming lesson. The doorbell rang around 2 in the afternoon. Through the video feed, I saw my mother standing on the porch, clutching her purse with white knuckles. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. I opened the door but remained in the doorway, blocking entry. "Mom, where's Jackson?" she demanded immediately. "I need to see my grandson." "He's not here. And even if he was, you're not allowed to see him. You received the letter from my attorney." "Those are just words on paper," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "I'm his grandmother. I have rights." "Actually, you don't. Not after what happened. Jackson was injured in your care because you abandoned him to go gambling." Her face flushed with anger. "That's a lie. We had an emergency, and that teenager was supposed to be watching him properly." A 16-year-old girl who did her best when adults who should have known better left a 4-year-old in her care without proper instructions or emergency contacts. I kept my voice level. "Mom, you need help. Dad's getting it. Why won't you?" Because I don't have a problem, she nearly shouted. The problem is you, keeping my grandson from me, turning my husband against me, making everyone think I'm crazy. A car pulled into the driveway. Grace and Jackson returning from swimming. My heart rate spiked. You need to leave. Now. I stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me. My mother saw the car and started toward it. There's my sweet boy. I moved quickly, blocking her path. Mom, stop. If you try to approach him, I will call the police. I'm not bluffing. She froze, her eyes wild. You wouldn't dare. Watch me. I held up my phone, 911, already dialed, and ready to send. Grace had spotted us, and smoothly redirected, driving past the house without stopping. I saw her on the phone, likely calling Will for backup. This is what it's come to? My mother's voice broke. Your own mother? Treated like a criminal? You did this, not me. You lied to everyone about me. You tried to access Amanda's life insurance money meant for Jackson. You attempted to get around the school's security protocols. What did you think would happen? For just a moment, I glimpsed something in her eyes. A flash of awareness, of recognition. But it was quickly replaced by the familiar defensive anger. Fine. Have it your way. But when you lose your precious job because everyone knows you're an unstable single father, don't come crying to me. The threat was so specific it caught me off guard. What are you talking about? She smiled, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. I called your company, spoke to HR, told them all about how you've been acting erratically, keeping your son from his loving grandparents, making wild accusations, how we're concerned about Jackson's safety with you. Ice formed in my veins. You did what? They were very interested to hear about your mental state, especially since you just got that big promotion. Said they'd need to look into it. In that moment, I saw my mother clearly for perhaps the first time in my life, not as the nurturing presence from my childhood or even as the resentful babysitter of recent months, but as someone so consumed by her addiction and need for control that she would destroy her son's career, her grandson's stability, her whole family's well-being rather than admit she needed help. Leave now, I said quietly, and don't come back. Any communication from this point forward goes through the attorneys. Braden, no. We're done. I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me, watching through the security camera as she eventually got back in her car and drove away. I immediately called Ted at the office, explaining the situation. To my relief, he was understanding. HR did receive a call from someone claiming to be your mother, he confirmed. But Braden, we've worked together for years. I know you, and I've met Jackson. Anyone can see what a great father you are. Besides, we have policies about this kind of thing. External complaints about employees are documented, but not acted upon without substantiation. Thank you, I said, relief washing over me. I'm sorry you got dragged into my family drama. Don't be. And if you need to take a few days to get this sorted out, do it. The San Francisco project is on track, and your team can handle things here. Grace returned with Jackson an hour later, after I confirmed the coast was clear. Will had followed them as backup, and the three adults sat at my kitchen table while Jackson watched a movie in the living room. I think it's time to get a restraining order, Will suggested. This is escalating dangerously. Grace nodded. I agree. She's shown she'll go to any lengths. Your job, Jackson's school. Where does it stop? I called Janet that evening and set the process in motion. The temporary restraining order was granted the next day based on the documented pattern of harassment, attempted interference with custody, and potential risk to Jackson's well-being. My father came to see me after receiving his copy of the order as my mother's spouse. He looked devastated but resigned. I tried everything I could think of to get through to her, he said as we sat on my back porch, watching Jackson and Grace plant flowers in the garden. Begged her to get help. Offered to go to counseling together. Even told her I'd reconsider the divorce if she'd just admit she has a problem. None of it worked? He shook his head. She's packed her things. Moving to Arizona next week to stay with her cousin indefinitely. He sighed heavily. 40 years of marriage, ending like this. I'm sorry, Dad. I know this isn't what you wanted. No. But maybe it's what needed to happen. He watched Jackson for a moment. The hardest part is knowing what I'm losing with him. But that's the consequence of my choices, isn't it? All those years I looked the other way, pretended her behavior wasn't getting worse. I failed you both. You're making better choices now, I said quietly. That matters too. A week later, Janet called with news. Your mother has withdrawn all opposition to the restraining order and signed an agreement waiving any claim to grandparents' rights. Her attorney filed the paperwork this morning. What changed? I asked, surprised by the sudden capitulation. I can't say for certain, but the documentation your sister provided about the gambling debts was compelling. And frankly, once we subpoenaed the records from Silver Creek Casino showing the frequency of her visits, including the day Jackson was injured, her case fell apart completely. Ashley had come through, providing bank statements and credit card bills showing the extent of our mother's gambling. Combined with the incident report from Jackson's injury and the formal complaints from the preschool about her unauthorized contact attempts, the evidence was overwhelming. That evening, as Grace and I prepared dinner together, moving in easy synchronicity around the kitchen while Jackson set the table, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The fight had been brutal, but necessary. I had protected my son, my career, and myself. Looking at Grace's profile as she stirred pasta sauce, I realized something else important had emerged from the chaos. A chance at a new beginning. A different kind of family, built on honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than obligation and secrets. What? She asked, catching me watching her. Nothing, I smiled. Just thinking that sometimes you have to fight for what matters most. She returned the smile, reaching out to squeeze my hand. And you did. Beautifully. 1 year later, our lives had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days of conflict with my parents. I stood in the backyard of our new home, watching as Jackson, now 5, helped my father set up the grill for our housewarming barbecue. The promotion at Horizon Technologies had exceeded expectations. After successfully launching the West Coast expansion, Ted had offered me a position as regional director with a substantial salary increase. The new role allowed me to work from home 3 days a week, while maintaining my career trajectory. Grace sat beside me on the patio, her hand resting comfortably in mine. What had started as friendship and mutual support had blossomed into love, gradual and steady. 6 months earlier, she had accepted a teaching position at Jackson's elementary school, where he would start kindergarten in the fall. Last month, she had accepted my proposal, and we were planning a small wedding for the holidays. Uncle Frank, can I light the fire? Jackson called out, using the title we'd settled on for my father. It maintained the family connection, while acknowledging the restructuring of our relationships. Not yet, buddy. Let me get the charcoal arranged first, Dad replied, ruffling Jackson's hair. My father had undergone his own transformation. After finalizing his divorce, he had embraced his new life with surprising vigor. He worked part-time at his friend's hardware store, joined a support group for families affected by gambling addiction, and had become a steadying presence in Jackson's life. Our agreement for supervised visitation had gradually relaxed as he proved himself trustworthy and committed to Jackson's well-being. Ashley arrived with her husband and their new baby, completing our gathering. She had been my strongest ally through the aftermath of the confrontation, attending court hearings and providing crucial evidence when needed. Have you heard anything? She asked quietly as we stood by the drinks table. I knew what she meant, without elaboration. Dad got a Christmas card from Arizona. No return address. He said she sounded okay but didn't mention coming back. My mother had followed through on her plan to move across the country. The distance had been a relief, allowing all of us to heal without the constant threat of disruption. According to my father, she had found a job as a receptionist in a doctor's office and was living with her cousin. Whether she had addressed her gambling addiction remained unclear. Do you ever think about reconciliation? Ashley asked, bouncing her fussy infant. I watched as Grace helped Jackson arrange hamburger patties on a plate, showing him how to press a small indent in the center so they would cook evenly. I used to think forgiveness meant allowing someone back into your life regardless of whether they'd changed, I said slowly. Now I understand it's more about releasing yourself from the anger while still protecting your boundaries. Ashley nodded. That's wise. I don't harbor resentment anymore, I continued. But I also won't expose Jackson to someone who refuses to acknowledge the harm they caused or take steps to ensure it won't happen again. The confrontation with my mother had been painful but necessary. It had forced all of us to examine the patterns of enabling and denial that had characterized our family dynamics for years. Breaking those patterns had created space for healthier relationships to form. Ashley nodded. That's wise. I don't harbor resentment anymore, I continued. But I also won't expose Jackson to someone who refuses to acknowledge the harm they caused or take steps to ensure it won't happen again. Ashley nodded. That's wise. What's that? It's chosen. Every person here made a conscious decision to be part of each other's lives, to show up consistently, to rebuild something beautiful from difficult circumstances. Her words captured exactly what I had been feeling. This gathering represented not just what we had survived, but what we had actively created together. That night, after everyone had gone and Jackson was tucked into bed in his new room, I found myself standing in the hallway, looking at the family photos Grace had arranged on the wall. There was Jackson as a toddler with Amanda, both smiling at the camera, unaware of the challenges ahead. Beside it hung newer images. Jackson and Grace building a snowman. My father teaching Jackson to fish at the lake. Ashley holding her newborn with Jackson, proudly standing beside her as Cousin Jackson. The progression of images told a story of loss, but also of resilience and growth. We had not merely survived the painful events of the past year. We had emerged stronger, with clearer boundaries and deeper connections. When I finally joined Grace in our bedroom, she was sitting up reading, her reading glasses perched on her nose in a way that made my heart swell with affection. Jackson asked me something interesting today, she said, setting her book aside. He wanted to know if loving new people means you have to love the old people less. What did you tell him? I said love isn't like a pie with only so many pieces to go around. It's more like a garden that grows bigger with each new plant. Sometimes old plants don't thrive and need to be moved or replaced, but the garden itself keeps expanding. I smiled, sitting beside her on the bed. That's perfect. I've been thinking about what you told me about your childhood, she continued. How your parents seemed so perfect, so united, and how devastating it was to discover the reality behind that facade. The secrecy caused more damage than the problems themselves, I agreed. If my father had been honest about their financial troubles from the beginning, if my mother had acknowledged her gambling instead of hiding it, maybe we could have found solutions together. That's the lesson, isn't it? Honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Boundaries, even when they're painful to establish. And the courage to start again when necessary. As I drifted off to sleep that night, Grace's steady breathing beside me, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the shock of my mother's rejection on that porch, to the peace of our new home, every step had taught me something valuable about love, family, and resilience. Love meant both support and accountability, not enabling destructive behavior. Family was defined by actions and choices, not merely by blood. And resilience came not from denying pain, but from moving through it with integrity and purpose. The mortgage I had once paid in secret had become a metaphor for all the hidden burdens we carry out of misguided love. True support required honesty, boundaries, and sometimes difficult choices. In setting those boundaries with my mother, I had not only protected Jackson but had created space for healthier relationships to flourish. As parents, we weren't just raising our children but teaching them how to navigate life's complexities with courage and compassion. Jackson would grow up understanding that love sometimes meant saying no, that family could be rebuilt in new forms, and that honesty, however difficult, was always the strongest foundation. That was the greatest gift I could give him, not protection from all pain, but the tools to face it with integrity, and the knowledge that whatever happened, he would never face it alone. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members for your own well-being? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most personal growth. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. And remember that creating a healthy family, whether by birth or by choice, is one of life's most rewarding journeys.